Family. Wake up, wake up, wake up. It's the first of the month. All right, there we go. All right, we live. Hey, welcome to the dungeon. Welcome to the Practical Purpose Podcast. I'm Dr. Williams, Brian Williams to be exact. Hey, we're gonna do some work tonight. I know I'm competing, or will be competing here in about an hour with the Final Four, the men's Final Four. Last night, USC lost. The Gamecocks lost last night, the girls, and tough loss. They're giving Don Staley a hard time about it, which I don't think they should be giving her a hard time about this, but they went as far as they could go, and they ran into a team that had the best player in the country, but also they had a better strategy. We talked about that on this show before, right? You got to have a strategy. Like, you have to have a strategy to everything you're doing in your life. You must have strategy, and they had a strategy that was better than the strategy that Don Staley had last night, and because of that, they won the game, right? They won the game. So on the show today, let me get through some housekeeping things. Man, I need you to like, share, subscribe, like, share, subscribe, hit that notification button so that whenever I go live, whenever I post anything, whether or not it's with leadership development, personal development, whatever it may be, you get the unique opportunity of seeing it first. All right. But I need you to go over to YouTube, hit that like button, tell everybody you know, and also subscribe to the channel. I see my moderators are in here. Pecan Tan, Sam, we here. I appreciate y'all being here tonight. We're gonna do some work. We're gonna do a little bit of work. We're in a series called The Principles of Process, and so we're going to continue to be talking about process tonight. We're going to go a little deeper into the principles of process. Let me give a disclaimer. We've been having some internet issues over the past couple weeks or so. We got a windstorm kind of going on right now outside. The wind is real bad, so we get disconnected. We'll get back on. We'll figure it all out. But we're going to be talking about tonight. I'm just maintaining. We're talking about surviving the process. All right. We're talking about surviving the process. And in the thumbnail, you saw my guy, Ice Cube, and people was asking me, why is Ice Cube on your thumbnail? He's there because he had a song called Trying to Maintain. All right. He had a song called Trying to Maintain. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about maintaining and surviving in the process. All right, that's what we're talking about tonight over the next few moments. Let's jump into our question of the day. We got a heavy question of the day today, and I need y'all to help me out in the dungeon by giving me an answer. Here's the question: why does Christianity have so many denominations? Which one is right? Listen, Why does Christianity have so many denominations? Which one is right? That's a tough question. Um, but we need an answer. We need an answer to that question. Sophia Carr, listen, she came through. She made the hoodie. Sophia Carr made the hoodie. Holiness is still right. Love it. She does great work. Go over to her Facebook page, follow her, tap into her business. I appreciate it. You came through for your boy. Came through for your boy. All right, let's jump into the question. Let's jump to the question. I need y'all in the dungeon to help us out. Why does Christianity have so many denominations? I have my answer, and my answer may upset some folk. For my new folk that's on the channel, listen, I upset people all the time. I upset people. I upset church folk a lot, and I'm one of them, so I can do it, right? So let's talk about it. Why does Christianity have so many denominations, and which one is right? I'm gonna go ahead and start with my answer because y'all acting like y'all slow to type into the chat to let me know what's going on. Tap in. Thank you so much for your support. You already know. You already know. You already know. So here's some reasons. It's not all the reasons. It may not be reasons that you like about why there's so many denominations. But one reason I believe is arrogance, it's pride, right? It's pride. We have this concept in human nature where we feel like if it happened before us, then we have to carry on that legacy, even if that legacy is incorrect, right? Even if those teachings are incorrect, we carry on those teachings, right? Even I remember growing up in church, they would say, uh, it was good. That old time religion is good enough for mama and grandmama and all them, and it's good enough for me, right? And because of that concept, what we've done is we've taken things that the Bible didn't really say, or things that the Bible didn't mean, and because our grandparents or our parents or those people had a certain understanding of the scripture, of the text, then we carried it on and it was actually incorrect. And because of that, we have created so many different denominations within Christianity. That's one reason. That's one reason. If you look on the screen, you see them. I didn't put all of them, but you got Baptists, you've got African Methodists, that's AME. You've got Seventh Day Adventists. You have Holiness Pentecostal. That's what I grew up in. You've got United Methodist. There's so many others. Then inside of those, you've got all these different organizations like, Church of God in Christ and Cool JC and all of those different denominations are part of Christianity. So that's the first reason I think that you have so many denominations, is because that concept that we don't want to let go of some things that may have not been scriptural or biblical, right? Here's the second reason. Hold on. Somebody put, okay. Yeah. Here's the second reason why I believe we have so many denominations. And this reason will upset people, but it's biblical illiteracy, right? So we read the Bible from a lens of whatever the denomination is that we go to church at, instead of reading the Bible for what it's saying to us, right? About Christ. See, that's the biggest thing. That's the biggest thing. So much teaching now has nothing to do with Christ. But we have biblical illiteracy. So you have some people that take this one scripture, right, and they create an entire denomination from one text, and then you have somebody else that takes that same text and they create something else, that someone creates something else. So now you have a different church on every corner because someone did not know how to properly exegete the text, right? So we've got so many different denominations. I don't know who asked that question. I hope they're on to hear the answer. But we've got so many different denominations. One, because we want to carry on traditions, right? When the Bible tells us the traditions of men choke the word, right? And then we also want to make sure that as we're carrying those things on, we don't want to feel bad or negative because the people who taught us what they knew would disagree with our understanding. And then, if you I don't want to get too deep into it, but you have progressive revelation in the Bible, right? Where God is progressively revealing things to us through the annals of time. Sam says, the further we get away from a proper interpretation of the scriptures, the more room we have for error. Yeah. Yeah. Your doctrine is everything, right? You hear people, I'm not going to throw no names out there, but you hear people that say, well, doctrine is not. No, your doctrine is everything, because if you have wrong beliefs, you're going to live wrong, right? And if you have wrong understanding of what the text is saying, then you're going to also apply it to your life wrong. We're going to talk about that just a little bit tonight. Pecan says, they all write to the people raised up in the denomination, right? They can't admit when they're wrong, right? So we've got so many different denominations in Christianity, and I believe that hurts us when we're trying to win people. It hurts us when we're trying to live a lifestyle. So you saw my answer is actually on my hoodie. Holiness is still right, but it's not the denomination of holiness. It's the principle of holiness. It's the standard of holiness. It's still right. And we're constantly in a process of becoming holy every single day. That's called sanctification, right? All right, so that was a good question. I know my time is limited tonight because of the Final Four. So that was a great question. We're going to jump right into what we need to talk about tonight. We're doing part 2 of the principles of process. All right, part 2 of the principles of process. My dog is outside going in. Part 2, principles of process. We're going to be talking about surviving the process. We're going to be talking about, from the title, I'm just maintaining. Listen, I'm just trying to maintain. Check this out.
When you feel like giving up, don't. When you thinking about giving up, don't. When it look like you ain't gonna make it, keep going. When they tell you you can't, come on, man, who are they? When they tell you you're not gonna make it, don't believe them, man. Don't believe them. You got to be relentless.
The harder the battle, the sweeter the victory. See, what you become in the process is more important than the dream. That's far more important. The kind of person you become, the character that you build, the courage that you develop, the faith that you're manifesting. Oh, it's something that you get up in the morning, you look yourself in the mirror, you're a different kind of person. You walk with a different kind of spirit. And people know that you know what life is, that you have embraced life. You knew it was hard, but you did it hard.
Here we go. We talk about the process. I can't see Steve Harvey without thinking about his TV show and him and setting him up there singing "Break Me Off a Piece of That Funk." I can't see it without thinking about that. Steve Harvey is he's become very motivational. Whether or not you agree with everything he says or not, I definitely don't agree with everything he says. I don't agree with everything anybody says. But I thought that clip was good, and Les was on that clip too, and he's one of the most powerful speakers that I've seen. Y'all can't tell me y'all don't think about "Break Me Off a Piece of That Funk" when y'all see Steve Harvey, man. That was a good show, though. Maybe we'll talk about that one time. The best sitcoms, 90s and 2000s. All right, so we're talking about surviving the process. We're talking about maintaining. We're talking about the principles of process. And this tonight is going to be a lot of it's going to be a little bit more Bible than normal, but I think that's okay for tonight. So people that are new to the Practical Purpose podcast, we try to explore life principles through the perspective or the lens of the Bible. So a lot of people can gravitate to this because it's practical. Right, it's practical, but we're also going to tie the Bible to what it is that we're discussing, because the Bible is the ultimate firm foundation I don't care who you listen to, what you like, what you don't like. The Bible is the ultimate firm foundation. So we're going to highlight some things out of the scriptures tonight, a little bit more than we normally do, but I think I can still make it practical for you. All right, so survival. We're talking about surviving the process. As we go through this, I want you to think about the processes in your life. Maybe you're in a process of you've got some physical ailment. Maybe it's your career. For me, it's my career, right? Maybe it's your family life. It's some processes that you're going through. I want you to keep those in the back of your mind as we talk about surviving the process. Survival. The word survival means the state or fact of continuing to live or exist, typically in spite of difficult circumstances. Continuing to live or exist, typically in spite of difficult circumstances. And I know that a lot of times in the church world and church circles, we're taught that we're supposed to have life and life more abundantly all the time. Right. And we don't focus a lot of times on the fact that there are seasons in your life where you're just surviving. You're just trying to survive. And that's not always a bad thing. Sometimes you're just surviving. In fact, when you look back over your life, the stories that come out first are the stories about how you survive. You always talk about the survival. Listen, Job wouldn't be in the Bible if he didn't have to survive. Moses wouldn't be in the Bible if he didn't have to survive. We wouldn't talk about Abraham or Isaac or Jacob if they didn't have some situations and some issues in their lives in which they had to survive. Right? You've got to figure out how to survive the processes. And we're going to talk about that tonight. Listen, it's not the strongest or the smartest who survive, but those who can best manage change. That's by Dr. Leon Megason. It's about managing change. We talked about this before, that change is constant in your life. You can depend on change. And the better you manage the changes of life, the better you are able to survive the processes. You've got to know how to manage change. And the changes of life, when they come, when you see them coming, when you learn how to adapt to them and you learn how to adjust to the changes of life, you start figuring out that survival is a talent. Knowing how to survive is something that you work at. You ever met a person who just know how to get through hard stuff? They've been through so much. They just know how to find a way to make ends meet. Them the people, them the people who gas tank is below E and their music still bumping. They found a way to make it in no matter what circumstances come in their lives. Suzanne Kaysen says survival is a talent. It's a talent. All right. So it's not about your strength. It's not about your speed. The scripture says that. It says the race isn't given to the swift or the strong, but to the one that endures to the end. And I never really understood that. Why? Because when I turn on the Olympics, the swiftest one is the one that gets the medal. Right? I never understood it. But what it's really saying is your victory is predicated on your dependency of God. Your victory is predicated on the intangibles like courage, like endurance, not necessarily your talent, not necessarily your gift. And we get blinded by gifts that we miss that there are some intangible skills that you have to have. In the secular world, we call that soft skills. There are some things that you have to have, some courage, some people skills that you need to possess if you're going to survive. It's not always your talent. Physical ailments is okay. That's the process right now. Okay. All right. So it's not given to the swift or the strong, but it's given to the one that has the ability to survive, the ability to endure. Listen, if you can endure the pain, you can survive anything. If you can endure the pain, you can survive anything. Listen, it's about those intangible skills that's needed to survive. And so when you're going through the process, whatever that process is in your life. Last time we talked about it in Hebrews 12:2, that Jesus, that scripture says we have to look unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. You have to have the correct mindset about the process. Your mindset is everything. Your perspective is everything. They have a quote that says your perspective is your reality. And it's true. Your perspective is everything. You have to have the proper perspective of the process, because if you don't have the proper mindset or the proper perspective of the process, you will think that the process is designed to destroy you. But the process is not designed to destroy you. Think about that. Think about, we talked about before on the show, Caleb and Joshua looked at the promised land that they knew was the promised land, right? They looked at the same thing the other 10 spies looked at, and they saw it differently. Their perspective said, we are well able, we are well capable, right? Think about that. They knew the name of the place was Canaan. They knew it was the promised land, but 10 out of 12 of them denied the fact that they could overtake it. Your mindset about the process is everything. So if you don't have a proper understanding of the process, of your perspective of the process, you're going to struggle even more than you have to as you go through the process. All right, y'all tracking with me? To survive, Pecan Tan says, to survive is to find meaning in your suffering, in the change and the challenges. Listen, that's so true. And so much so, in church circles and Christian circles, we don't believe in the suffering. We don't believe in that. We don't even talk about the suffering. We don't talk about the change. We don't talk about the challenges. We just jump and shout and run and flip over the pew and then go home and then come back the next Sunday to the same exact show. The same show. Your mindset about the process is key. Okay. The process, when you understand first and foremost that the process is not designed to destroy you, people who are destroyed in the process, it happens because of self-infliction. God doesn't design any process in your life to destroy you. Now, he does design processes to break you. He does design processes to mold you. He does design processes to make you less comfortable or uncomfortable, but he does not design process to destroy you. Look at the life of Job. Right? Job, y'all know the story of Job, and the devil comes in to talk to God. That's the first issue. The devil was in heaven talking to God with the rest of the angels, like it was his, like he was at home, right? And he says, God says to him, where you been at? He says, I've been searching the earth to and fro, going about trying to find something to do. And he says, have you considered my servant Job? He says something powerful. The devil says, yeah, but you got a hedge around Job. How did he know that there was a hedge around him? The only way he could have known that there was a hedge was if he tried to get at Job before and it didn't work. He tried to get at Job previously and it didn't work. And the old folk will say that's danger seen and unseen, right? But the story of Job shows us that the process isn't designed to destroy you. The process is designed to break you. It's designed to mold you. It is designed to create or to expose the character of who you are. It's designed to give you an understanding of who you are, who the people are in your life, and who God is in your life. Right? The process is not designed to destroy you. In fact, God, after the process, God does not just restore, he gives recompense. He does not just restore, he gives recompense. What does that mean? God is not just going to restore your position, right? He is going to compensate you for the inconvenience. He's going to compensate you for the inconvenience. Isn't that what he did with Job? He compensated them for the inconvenience. Isn't that what he did with the children of Israel? He told them that you are not going to leave. I think that's Exodus 3:21. He says you're not going to leave empty-handed. He could have just delivered them from slavery, but he delivered them. Then he allowed them to take everything they wanted to take with them. He gave them recompense. He compensated them for the inconvenience. There is some compensation that comes along with being faithful during the process. My sister is on here. Doc Simmons, the process is designed for growth in every area of your life. Yes, ma'am. To survive is to find meaning. I already read that. Okay. Oh, you posted that twice. I see it. Yeah, God gives recompense. He compensates us for the inconvenience. But you've got to be strong enough during the process. You've got to be faithful to the process. You got to trust it. You got to trust it. You've got to trust the process. So your mindset has to be one, the process is not designed to destroy me. Listen, I got my doctorate almost 2 years ago now. And the moment I realized that the process was designed to see if I would quit, that's when I had a breakthrough. Because I knew I wasn't going to quit. I had to understand, my mindset had to shift. This has nothing to do with writing. This has everything to do with will you endure? And once I realized that this was about not quitting, I was able to get through the process. The hardest thing I've ever done. Right? You've got to understand that the process is not designed to destroy you. But here, you got to understand this too. You have to, and I'm going to upset some people, you have to have a proper understanding of the promises. That's where we mess up. That's where your doctrine comes in. I told y'all this was Bible heavy tonight. I'm sorry. This Bible heavy tonight. You have to have a proper understanding of the promises. And this is where your doctrine comes in. This is where that first question comes in about denominations, right? You got to have proper understanding of the promises. Some of us are looking for promises to help us feel good, but the promises is not actually applicable to what we're going through. One of the major ones, I told you, some of y'all gonna be mad. One of the major ones is when you're going through health issues and you go to Isaiah 53 and you say, by his stripes I'm healed. Do you know Isaiah 53 has nothing to do with physical healing? In fact, Isaiah tells us that. He says he was wounded for our transgressions. What's that? That's sin. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace, what peace? Our peace with God was on his shoulders, and with his stripes we were healed. Healed from what? That's spiritual healing. But we apply that in the process wrong. So because we have a wrong application or understanding of the promise, we discount the sovereignty of God. Now, is physical healing paid for on the cross? Of course it is. But it's not always realized in this life. At some point, you're going to be, the old folk would say, I got another building, right? At some point, you're going to be healed, but it might not be in this life. And you've got to understand that the God of the process has given us the tools we need to get through that process, whether or not we see the fruition of that on this side or on the other side. All right. So you've got to understand that it's not designed to destroy you, right? You've got to have a proper understanding of the promises. But watch this. The process should make you contrast people in your life and God. The process should make you contrast the qualities of the people in your life and God. When you're going through the process, you remember we talked about last time those horizontal and vertical relationships, right? When you're going through the process, whatever that process is, it should teach you about who the people are that are in your life, but it should also teach you about who God is. It should also teach you about who you are. The process is designed for you to contrast the differences between the people and in your life and who God is. The prophetess, she says we have to pray for a go through spirit. Have to. You have to. All right. So the process should make you contrast people and God. Listen, you should see some qualities in God that you may not see in all the people in your life as you go through whatever that process is. Here's some qualities here. God will never give up on you. There's some people that you're connected to now that when you went through or began the process of going through what you're going through, that they're no longer connected to you. They are no longer as accessible to you, right? But God never gives up on us, right? The contrast of knowing that the process teaches me that he will never give up on me has to make me dependent on him, right? The scripture tells us that it says, he who has begun a good work is faithful to accomplish it. The process is a good work, although it hurts. The process is a good work. God never gives up on us. People do. So the process should allow you to be able to contrast the difference between God and the people. Even if the people are your friends, your siblings, your parents, your kids, they don't compare to God, the qualities that God have. Listen, God will never leave or forsake you. We know that, right? There's some people that when you get in the process, whatever that process is, they're going to leave you and they're going to forsake you. They're going to mentally forsake you and they're going to physically leave you. Right? When you get in the process teaches us that these are people who are not, who don't need to be in my life right now. Right? They may need to come back later, but they don't need to be there right now. But God never leaves or forsakes us. In fact, the text says that he's a very present help. I just like the way that sounds. He's a very present help in the time of need, right? How many of your friends have always been a very present help, right? The process teaches us the differences between people and God. Right? We understand during the process that God doesn't make mistakes. Now, this is a difficult one because while we're going through the process, we don't get that. We don't always get that until we see the end of it and we look back in retrospect and we're able to say, you know what? God never makes a mistake. He never makes a mistake. He never gives up on us. People do. He never leaves us or forsake us. People do. Listen, the old folk with that one, old folk would say, trust in him who will not what? Leave you. Right? People going to leave you. He doesn't make mistakes. People do. Right? The process teaches us that. He never changes. People change. We change every day. Now, the way he deals with us changes, but he never changes. That's what he said in Hebrews. He said, I am the Lord, I change not. Right? There's no shadow of turning with him. He never changes. The process teaches us that about him, but it teaches us that about people in our lives, right? The contrast between God and the people in your life. God never stops loving us. People will. People do. When you say something to upset people, sometimes if they're really not for you, they'll stop loving you. The process teaches us that God never does that, right? He never stops loving us. And lastly, it teaches us that he's undefeated. He's never lost. My daughter, she likes that song. I think that's CC Winans. She be walking around the house talking about God. God has never lost a battle, right? He's never lost. Like that's enough for us to be able to hold on and survive the process, is to know that the author of the process has never lost, even when it seems like he's losing. He's never lost. The people who are advising us, they've lost. They've lost before. I'm not saying they can't give sound advice, but they've lost. But if you're not getting your first advice from the author of the process, then you're going to find yourself in a difficult situation. Listen, so the process teaches us the character of God versus the character and qualities of people in our lives. Think about Job again. Think about Job is going through that whole ordeal that God put on him, that God referred to him, right? And his wife says, listen, why don't you just curse God and die? His wife said that. Imagine the thoughts that had to go through Job's head when he's going through that process. He's then able to make a contrast between God and those people. Listen, I want you to think about that. As you think about the process, think about what the process revealed to you about certain people and how you apply that to your relational intelligence. Because oftentimes people will be revealed to us in the process, but because we don't know how to let go of things, we continue to have people who are not designed to be in our life for a long period of time. We keep them in our life past the time period, past their expiration date. You've got to have relational intelligence. Jesus said to Judas, he said, go ahead and do what you got to do. He sent him. He said, go ahead. I know you about to betray me. Go ahead and do what you got to do. Right? You have to have the relational intelligence to look back at the process and see this person wasn't good for me and this person was. But through all of that, I know that God remained stable through the process. Process teaches us about people, and the process allows us to know or understand who's in our life for what reason and who's in our life for just a season. And you've got to know that as you go through the process. That relational intelligence is key to your ability to survive. Listen, we talked about that last week when the text says lay aside every weight, that weight and the sin that easily besets us. Everything that's a weight is not a sin. And sometimes a weight is a person. Sometimes you have to lay aside people to survive the process. And that doesn't mean you lay them aside permanently, but sometimes you have to lay them aside so that you can survive the process and get to what Jeremiah 29:11 calls the expected end. All right. So we're talking about having your mindset right. We're talking about understanding, having a proper understanding of the promises. We're talking about the fact that the process helps us to contrast people and God. But let's go to the text as we wrap it up. I see a comment. Here we go. PK10 says the same God yesterday, today, yeah, and forever. That's Hebrews. Same God. That's Ty Tribbett. Same God today, yesterday, today, and forevermore. Right. So here on the Practical Purpose Podcast, we try to take life principles and we try to get a foundation of text for it. Right. So we're talking about the process. We're talking about specifically surviving the process tonight. And so let's go and see if we can find this somewhere in the Bible, somewhere that gives us a firm foundation. I know we talked a little bit about Job. We talked about some texts, but let's go and see if we can find how do I survive and maintain through the process. Let's find a sure foundation in the text. And I'm gonna pull up a scripture that everybody knows. Everybody knows. It's in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. Everybody knows this text. But there are three things that Paul gives us in the text that teach us how to survive, how to maintain through the process. And I like to use the term maintain. And my cousin Jimmy Williams Kashif rest in peace. I would ask him, "How you doing, man?" He died of cancer, and he would say, "Man, I'm just maintaining. I'm just maintaining." Sometimes there are times in life where you just maintain, right? And you've got to maintain and survive to the process until you can get to the expected end. Let's look at it. 2 Corinthians 12, 8 through 10 says this. This is about the thorn in the flesh that Paul had, right? It says that God gave him a thorn in the flesh so that he would not become too arrogant. He would not become too prideful. Let me stay there before we get there. Sometimes the process is designed to keep you from being prideful. Sometimes things are given to you, ailments, physical, spiritual, are given to you and are allowed to keep you from being prideful, because God knows and understands that He created us to be knowledgeable, smart, talented, and gifted. And if He doesn't hinder some of that, we will get too prideful, especially if you're in a leadership position. When you know you're good, you get prideful because people start talking to you. People start telling you how great and how good you are, and you get prideful. And Paul, this is the same Paul who went to the third heaven, and he saw things that he could not tell about, he couldn't talk about. And God knew that what I have to do is get, because of how much revelation I'm giving him, I got to give him something to keep him from being prideful. So he says in the text, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power, my strength is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Listen, he gives us 3 things there about surviving the process, maintaining during the process. Here's the first thing he says. He says, 3 times I pleaded, I prayed to God to remove this. As you're trying to survive the process, the first thing you've got to understand about surviving the process is that you have to have communication and fellowship with the God of the process. He says, 3 times I pleaded with him. I prayed. 3 times I prayed. Prayer is a relationship, not a religious activity. Prayer is a relationship. It's relational. In fact, when you communicate, communication is about listening more than it is about speaking. Listen, communication and fellowship is important and key if you're going to survive the process. You've got to communicate. You've got to fellowship if you're going to survive the process. Question: how much time do you spend complaining about the process versus fellowshipping? My sister, that's a leader right there. Alex is a leader. Is a leader. She keep it real too. I love it. Listen, how much time are you spending complaining about the process? Paul told us. Paul said, 3 times I pleaded. Y'all know what pleaded is. Y'all know what pleading is. That was that Johnny Gill, that pleading, that begging. he said, he said, I pleaded with him. How much time do you spend complaining about the process versus fellowshipping and communicating with God? That's the first key. You got to be in communication and you got to have fellowship if you're going to survive the process. Now, the text talks about communicating and fellowship with God because he says he pleaded, he prayed to God. But who are you communicating and fellowship with outside of God? Because there are some people that's designed to be in your life to help you through the processes. But oftentimes we're fellowshipping with the people who are not supposed to be there. The people who are not designed in this season to help us with the process, and you won't let them go. And because you won't let them go, they become a weight that's causing you to struggle as you go through the process. Who's in your ear? Who's in your ear? Who are you allowing to feed you? in the process. Listen, communication works for those who work at it. Let me say that again. Communication works for those who work at it. That's not just your horizontal relationships. That's also your vertical relationship, right? If you work at communication, if you work at fellowship, if you work at being still, if you work at hearing from God, right? If you work at it, if you work at talking to God, if you work at pleading with it, if you work at talking to people, you'll find yourself in a better place with more strength to survive the process. But we don't work at it. Right? In Christian circles, we think that God is going to speak everything to us in our ear. And there are a lot of theologians who actually teach that God doesn't even talk to us that way. Now, I don't believe that. But the primary way that he communicates with us is in his word. It's right there. So you've got to work and spend some quantity of time opening that to see what he's saying. Paul says the first thing that you got to do if you're going to survive the process is you've got to have communication and fellowship with God. He says three times I prayed, I pleaded with him. Let me hit this last point before I move on. If you want to understand how God works, which none of us can fully understand, and I'm not saying that I do, but you got to do some things in stillness. You've got to have intentional time to be still. Didn't Psalms 46:10 say that? Be still and know. You can't know what you're supposed to know until you get still. And we don't live in a culture that allows us to be still. You got to be still. You got to be still. We're scared to be still because when you be still, you start realizing that you're not living up to your potential, that you're not doing your part. So we don't want to be still. But the first key that Paul gives us here is that we've got to be in communication with God. I'm almost done. Second thing he says here, because I don't want y'all to think I'm making it up. Second thing he says is, he says 3 times I prayed, I pleaded that it should lead me, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Here's the second key to surviving and maintaining during the process. You got to understand that you're not sufficient. I know on Sunday the preacher gonna get up and say you are enough. You're not enough. You're not sufficient. Because if Paul was sufficient, he wouldn't need to pray. He wouldn't have a need to pray about this thorn. God said, my grace is sufficient. You are not sufficient on your own. You cannot survive the process on your own. That's twofold now. Number one, you need God to survive the process, to maintain the process. Number two, you need some people to help you survive the process. You in yourself, you're not sufficient. Your strength is found in your dependency on God. Your strength is found in your dependency on God. Y'all remember that song? Y'all ain't been saved y'all whole life. Who is that? Boosie? I can't even spell it. What? INDEP? Independent? Talking about how independent we're supposed to be? No, your strength is not found in your independence. Your strength is found in your dependency. He said, my grace is sufficient. You're not sufficient. PK and Tan, it's the stillness. It's in stillness that you can be fully present, consecrated. We scared of that. We scared of it. I mean, we scared of stillness. Think about that. You get in your car, you got the radio on. You pull up at the job, you got the radio on. You get in your office, you got background music. Come in the house, you got TV on. You don't have no time to be still. You get in the shower, you on YouTube in the shower. Something always playing. There's no time for stillness. Sleep with the TV on. You can't be still while you sleep because you got the TV on. Listen, there's no time for stillness. We don't have a culture that helps us to be still. And that's why we have a culture that is constantly moving further away from God, because you can't know God if you don't know how to be still. Peak antenna took me all the way backwards. Now I wasn't even supposed to be there. Paul says, God says, my grace is sufficient. In other words, you're not sufficient. You're only sufficient as you depend on him. Great things happen when you stop relying on yourself and start relying on God. Great things happen when you stop relying on yourself. What do you mean, Doc? You got to stop relying on your gift. You got to stop relying on your talent. You got to stop relying on what happened in the past. And you got to create a strategy and a plan to survive the process. Listen, I watched the game last night. I watched USC, the girls play, and I used to coach basketball, so I'm really in awe of Dawn Staley and some of the things that she did. But I said a few weeks ago, I said UCLA, they were the first team that packed the paint like that, and I said they gave the blueprint for how to beat USC. They just didn't have the personnel, right? And what I saw in some of those girls was that they were relying on just their physical ability, not their ability to strategize in order to win that game. And so often that's what that text means when it says not by might nor by power. That's what that text means when it says the race is not given to the swift or to the strong. It's not in your talent or gifts. It's in your dependency on the author of the process. How dependent are you on God? Like how dependent are you? You've got to really humble yourself to be dependent. Listen, so he shows us in the text that you had to communicate, you got to have fellowship, and you are not sufficient. That's really, if you don't take anything else from this whole teaching, you're not sufficient in yourself. And so often, too often, maybe I'm just talking to myself, too often we get caught up in our gift and our talent that we don't realize that, you know what, someone gave me this gift and talent. James said all good and perfect gifts come from God. You are only sufficient. You're only as sufficient or as successful as your ability to be dependent. Let me move on. Last point Paul makes here. If you want to survive the process, he says, therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Listen, Paul was a master writer. He really, I mean, look at that. He says, I will boast in my weaknesses. That's a dichotomy, right? You don't boast about your weaknesses. Paul says, I will more gladly boast in my weaknesses. Here's the third thing that you're going to have to do if you're going to survive to the process is you got to do what the poet, what the rapper Kendrick Lamar says. You got to be humble and sit down. He says, I'm going to boast more gladly in my weaknesses. Why? Because my weaknesses show that the product or the result of the process is not my doing. My weaknesses show that the gifts and talents that I have, yes, I am responsible for cultivating them, but ultimately I'm only able to be as gifted and talented as I am because I'm totally dependent on the giver. My mom, Miss Ann, she said, I've learned how to lean and truly. She about to start a quartet group. That's Lee Williams. I've learned to lean and truly depend on God. Listen, your strength is found in your dependency, not your ability to be independent. My sister Mitra says our humility draws others to Christ, not us. Listen, it's got to be about him, because at the end of the day, we are so flawed. We are so deeply stained, right? Ain't that what the hymn says? Deeply stained within, right? We are so flawed that our humility, that Paul says, I got to pull that up again. Paul says, I'm going to boast all the more in my weaknesses. I just think that's powerful. Listen, true humility is staying teachable regardless of how much you already know. That's Dr. Dana Aria. She says true humility is staying teachable regardless of how much you already know. We think we know too much, and sometimes we know a whole lot. But when you're humble, you understand that I am still teachable, even though I feel like I shouldn't be taught. There are still times, there are still situations, there are still processes that God puts in my life to teach me. And I don't care how high you get, I don't care what title you have, you got to be teachable. You got to be teachable. I did a leadership video on my YouTube channel about teachability. Sometimes we get titles. Sometimes we get so good at what we do that we forget that we got to be teachable. Listen, life is a long lesson in humility. Life is a long lesson in humility. And God himself says, speaking to him, says that he will take hold of your right hand and will help you. That's what he said. He said, matter of fact, he said he gives grace to the humble. He denies the proud and he gives grace to the humble. So you've got to be humble if you're going to survive the process. You can't survive it on your own. Humility is the gateway into the grace of God. Humility is the gateway into the grace of God. It's not until you understand that you're not sufficient to survive what life is throwing at you. I don't care what the preacher say. The preacher say you can take on the devil by yourself. No, you can't. No, you cannot. I don't care how much binding you do. I don't care how much loosing you do, which is completely taken out of context because it ain't talking about binding the devil in that text. And if y'all keep binding him, somebody keep loosing them. So you are not sufficient in yourself to take on the devil by yourself. You need to humble yourself now. Don't get it twisted. I don't know if you can find nobody in the Bible that took them on by themselves and won. He's a formidable opponent. That's what the scripture says. You've got to humble yourself. And too often, I'm talking about church folk because I'm one of them. Too often we have created this all I got to do is speak it and it happens. We've created this kind of concept that I'm strong enough to take on the enemy myself. Bring it on. Watch what you say now. Because even when he brought it on to Job, God had to give him the parameters. Job wouldn't have been able to handle that. He could only handle it because God gave him the parameters. You're not equipped by yourself to do that. And so your humility is a gateway into the grace of God. When you humble yourself to realize that the only way I'm going to survive what I'm going through is because of what God has placed in me and what God does through me, then God begins to give you more grace. Right? I think Peter said, and grace for grace. He gives you more grace as you humble yourself. And what does that grace do? That grace sustains you through the process. Right? It sustains you. It's sufficient for you. And the reason you need sufficient grace is because you are insufficient. God did not create us to be independent. God did not create us to be independent. Listen, even when he created Adam and he looked down, he said, it's not good for you to be alone. He said, it's not good for you to be alone. He never created us for independence. He created us to be totally dependent on him and totally dependent on his spirit in our lives. Listen, if you're going to survive, I'm wrapping it up. If you're going to survive and maintain during the process, you got to look at what Paul says to us in 2 Corinthians 12, 8-10. Communication and fellowship. Understanding that you in your own abilities, your own gifts, your own talent, you're not sufficient. And understanding that you need to be humble. You need to practice humility if you're going to survive the process. All right, if you're going to survive, that's your roadmap. I don't care what the process is. I don't care if it's sickness. I don't care if the process is just aging. I don't care if the process is career. I don't care if the process is your family. If you don't, number one, be still enough to fellowship with God. If you don't understand that I don't care how strong you are, how fast you are, how smart you are, you're not going to be sufficient in yourself to survive the process until you humble yourself. You're going to be in the process longer than you have to be. Ask the children of Israel, 40 years. And, and they still didn't get to the promised land. They didn't get to go into it because they didn't follow these concepts. So here's your homework. Your homework is simply 3 questions about the process, and we'll be back on in a few weeks. We'll have Wilmot Berry on in a few weeks to talk about cycles, to talk about steps and stages. The fact that God works in our lives, not always at one time, but in steps and stages. But here's your homework. Your 3 questions. I want you to write them down, or one of the moderators put the questions on the screen in the chat. Who are you trusting in the process? Whatever process it is you're going through, who are you trusting? Listen, because there's a we can take things too far and we can take things not far enough, right? So when you get to them heavy church people, oh, I only trust God. That's it. That ain't true, because you trust your husband, you trust your wife. There's some people that you trust. You have to know who you're trusting in the process, because the people you communicate with, watch this, the people you communicate with, you communicate because there's some level of trust. So you got to be careful who you're talking to about the processes that you're going through, because the people that you're talking to are either adding weight or alleviating weight from you. Who are you trusting? That's the first question. Who are you listening to? Who are you allowing to feed you? Who are you allowing to deposit things into your life, right? Who are you listening to? You can hear something and not be listening, right? So who are you listening to? Who are you allowing to deposit things into your life? You've got to watch that. Third question, what are you feeding yourself in the process? What are you feeding yourself? Because so often we get into hard parts of the process, and what we end up doing is we sulk, right? And there's a time for that now. Don't get it twisted. The scripture says, weeping may endure for a night. Sometimes you're gonna have to cry and you're gonna have to sulk. And sometimes we get to a place where it's like, woe is me, right? And sometimes that's okay for a short period of time. But then you got to start feeding yourself whatever it's going to take to get you through the process. And if you do not have the right people around you, you're not going to feed yourself the right stuff. If you don't have humble people around you, The people around you are just going to tell you how good, gifted, and talented you are. And that's going to keep you from being able to maintain during the process. What are you feeding yourself in the process? What are you consuming? Sometimes you got to get off Facebook, unless the Practical Purpose podcast is on, right? Sometimes you got to get off YouTube. Sometimes those things are not bad, right? That's what Paul was saying. Lay aside every weight and the sin. Everything that's a weight is not a sin. It's not bad until you can overconsume yourself with it and you start feeding yourself things that are opposite of where you're trying to go. You got to be careful with that. Right? What are you feeding yourself? So I want you to write those down. I want you to think about those things this week. Think about who am I trusting? Who am I listening to? What am I feeding myself? Because those things are going to determine how well you survive and maintain in the process, because it's not designed to destroy you. It's designed to break you. It's designed to mold you. It's designed to show you your character and the character of God. Right. All right. That's it for tonight. I know the Final Four is about to come on, and I'm not competing with the Final Four. We'll be back on. We're gonna have a midweek session about 2 weeks with my brother, my friend Wilmot Berry will be on to talk about steps and stages. We finally got him on the calendar this time, so he'll be on as in a midday session. I think that's April the 12th. We'll be on at 12 p.m. And we'll be talking about steps and stages of the process. Remember, we're in this series. Appreciate you, sis. Remember, we're in this series of principles of process, and we're just talking about the things that we go through in our lives and how we can maintain, survive, and we're going to talk about thriving in the process as we close it in part 4. Thriving in the process. Listen, this is Dr. Williams. Be blessed. Be great. Be humble. Sit down. Until next time, y'all be good.